So who was Thomas Malthus? An 18th century Anglican clergyman living in England who was concerned about the future, particularly concerned about the interplay of two different rates of growth. One being the rate of growth of the human population, and the other being the rate of increase of the food supply. Now we know how population increases. Malthus referred to this rate of population increase as a geometrical expansion of population. We might call it an exponential rate of population growth. Well, he was thinking of births and not so much of death rates and mortality or immigration. He was concerned with the ability of human beings to breed rapidly and have large families. And this was this is an observation that he saw during the Industrial Revolution in England as rural families were moving into the cities and becoming making the cities very crowded and very dirtier than they were, more crowded than they were. And before large changes in industrial production and the way cities were designed, London was a pretty dirty, crowded, death-filled place in the late 18th century, early 19th century when Malthus is writing. So he's reflecting on his circumstances. He's thinking about the future based on his observations. Now, the other rate that he was interested in is the rate of the increasing food supply. How much food can a society produce? How much grain, for example, can England produce per year? This had never been something that was very reliable. There were always crop failures and therefore famines. And Malthus was concerned that the larger the population got, and the more concentrated that the population got in the cities, the more the likelihood of famines and crop failures and problems with the food supply, what we would call today food insecurity. Okay, so Malthus is concerned about this, and he's trying to reason what could possibly happen in the future. And so he said that you have the ability to increase the amount of food supply just in a limited amount of ways, because we have a limited amount of land resources. One way that you can increase food supply is by expanding production. You can expand cultivation. But you can only do that to a certain degree, of course. You can only open up new land for agriculture that is appropriate for agriculture. If you're trying to farm poor land, then you're wasting your time, and production's not going to increase much. So you can only open up so much new land, and that of course depends on the size of your country and the physical geography conditions of your country. The other way that you can increase food supply is by, and this is not thinking of importing food at all, but the other way that you can increase food supply is by increasing the technology or increasing the efficiency of production, or what we might think of as the return, the efficiency of a particular type of farming. And those sorts of changes were going on throughout the 18th century, and technological changes had increased productivity quite a bit. But again, Malthus saw this increase in productivity as being much slower than the ability for the human population to reproduce itself. And therefore he made the proposition that eventually, as food supply may grow like this, from the ability to grow in a linear fashion, that population would grow exponentially and somewhere surpass that food supply. And that is where Malthus said would come catastrophes, famine, warfare, disease. These are the things that he called positive checks on population. Those positive checks would, of course, reduce the population and push the population perhaps back to a state of equilibrium or less with the food supply. This is Malthusian theory. And over time, he reasoned that the cycle would be ongoing, and so there would be these occasional crises in agricultural production and crises in food supply, positive checks against the population, reducing the population, starting the process back over again. That's Malthusian theory. Now, was Malthus correct? No. Throughout the 19th and the 20th centuries, massive increases in productivity due primarily to the Industrial Revolution. You know, the whole thing that got Malthus started thinking about all this in the first place. Increases in productivity due to technological changes have, for the most part, expanded production beyond Malthus's wildest dreams. In addition to that, we also need to recall that world trade has also opened up the world economy, particularly during the 20th century. And this allows areas to specialize in various types of produce, wheat, whatever. It allows specialization of production, which then allows, and of course, because of transportation technologies, we have the ability to move food rapidly. So Malthus was off on that one. He was also misguided in assuming that human populations would forever increase and population size would be reflecting family sizes of 8 to 10 children. Of course, once people move into cities and live in industrialized settings, they realize that their children are no longer great assets as they were on the farm, and children become more liabilities. And this is particularly true in the 20th century when children in industrialized societies, for the most part, require increasingly expensive education. The ability to have smaller families was the carryover of technology again, and technology allowed children, infants and children, to survive more. Mostly during the late 20th century, we see big technological changes in sanitation, in nutrition, and in medical care. And with advances in medical care, children and infants survived more, and therefore family sizes tended to come down because parents realized that their children would survive, which was fantastic. So reduction in infant mortality, reductions in child mortality, reductions in family size in relation or in response to that has now brought down rates of growth everywhere in the world. Now, there are still some areas that are fairly rural, and there are still some areas where large families are still the norm, but for the most part, we see, even in countries that were 30, 40 years ago considered to be hopelessly underdeveloped, Southeast Asia, Latin America as an example, even in those poorest countries, we see families now choosing to have 2, 3 children, and that is a fantastic change in human history.